Hi, welcome to another episode of Webcam Sessions. Today we're going to be doing some strumming, and we're actually going to be, in some ways, building off of what we worked on in last week's episode. So if you haven't checked that out, we talked about chunking in last week's episode. Please do check that out so that you can get a good chunk as we work on this pattern. Today we're going to be working on what I think is the best, or one of the best, strum patterns on an ukulele. Obviously there's no such thing as the best strum pattern, but this one's pretty close. For a lot of people, the first pattern they use is oftentimes called the down, down, up, down, up pattern, right? And that sounds something like this, if I were to play it with like a C chord. Right? And if you've learned that pattern before, you probably recognize that sound. And even if you haven't learned that pattern before, you probably still recognize the sound. It's kind of the go-to pattern for most people. Today we're going to be learning how to add some chunks in there to make it a pattern that's still very similar, but adds some cool little differences to it to make it more interesting. Before we dive in there though, let's just talk briefly about how to strum a ukulele in this way, in case you haven't done that before. So to do a pattern like your down, down, up, down, up pattern, you want to make sure one thing, that your hand that's strumming is always moving. And a lot of times people kind of get stalled with these patterns because they try to move their hand and then stop and then try to jump it to the next beat. For instance, if it's called down, down, up, they might go down, down, up, down, up, which is not right at all, right? It sounds really jerky. In fact, that's how I tried to learn it at first, right? Down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. No good at all, right? So the trick is to keep that hand always moving, and to acknowledge that you're not always going to strike the strings. Sometimes you're going to miss them. And so that down, down, up, well, you can't actually go down twice in a row, right? You have to come up in between. Your hand can't actually move down twice. So we're going to go down, and then we're going to bring the hand back up to miss the strings, right? So that down, down, up, down, up pattern is really down, miss coming up, down, up, miss going down, up, down, up. If I say it using this, it looks something like this. Down, miss, down, up, miss, up, down, up. Again, a little faster. Down, miss, down, up, miss, up, down, miss, down, up, miss, up, down, up. Now by keeping my hand always moving, you see the pattern gets much more regular. Now, if you need more help with this, be sure to check out the strumming course that I did with Ukulele Underground. We go very much into detail with the concept of missing the strings and striking it, as well work on countless different strum patterns and other things like that. So if you haven't already, please check it out. I'll be talking about it a couple times throughout the video today. But let's get to the real fun. Let's get to the ultimate pattern that we're going to do here. We can call this a Calypso chunk pattern, or just the best ukulele strum pattern, at least for today, right? So here's what we want to do. We want to take our chunk, which we worked on in last week's session, which is really getting that fat muted sound with just our strumming hand. And we talked about last week how we can get a fatter sound or a softer sound. Today I want it as fat as we can make it. So using more of the palm of the hand as we're muting here. Now, to do this pattern, for now, let's go and play a G chord. Go and take your index finger on the second fret of the C string, ring finger here on the third fret of the E, and middle finger here on the second fret of the A. We're going to start by doing a down strum. And then we're going to miss coming back up. And now where we usually would do another down, we're going to do a chunk. So it starts off with down, miss, chunk. And then we're going to come back up, and then we're going to miss going down. And then come up again, and then do another chunk, and then do an up. So the whole thing, again, broken down in pieces, is down, miss, chunk, up, miss, up, chunk, up. Again, down, miss, chunk, up, miss, up, chunk, up. So when we put this into a little bit faster time, you'll notice it starts to sound a little bit more musical. And those chunks, you'll actually notice, are going to be on what we call beats 2 and 4. So if we count this, essentially we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and as our arm is moving, or rather our hand is strumming. And the first down would be beat 1, the miss would be and, the chunk would be 2, the up would be and, the 3 would be a miss, the and would be a strum, and the 4 would be a chunk, with the and being a strum. So where I was going with that is the chunks occur on beats 2 and 4. And when we have it on 2 and 4 like that, it gives this kind of percussive sound, almost like people are clapping their hands, right? And what's funny is when we're clapping our hands to music, the ideal place to clap it is not on 1 and 3. So if a song's playing, we don't want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's actually better to do it on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And oftentimes we call this the backbeat, right? And it's a really cool way to create a really nice sound that's just more catchy, I find. The 2 and 4 just sounds more fun. And so when we put that with this pattern and we start to speed it up a little bit, you can really get that backbeat feel. So again, using the G chord, let's go ahead and try this again, and let's try to say these motions and play them. We're going to do it 4 times in a row here. So here we go. Down, miss, chunk, up, miss, up, chunk, up. 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 Pretty cool, right? So now let's go ahead and try doing it even faster yet. And we don't have to say it this time, so you can try practicing it more full speed. So I'll go ahead and count us in. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Pretty cool sound, right? Now, I'm going to show you a chord progression I really like to use with this one, just to practice it. Going from the G chord, let's go ahead and go down to an F chord. And the way that we're going to think about this is we're going to be moving our index finger down to the first fret of the E string, and as we do this, we're kicking our middle finger up to the second fret of the G while removing the ring, right? So it's not just this to this, it's rather this, to try and make it as efficient as we can. And then after we play the F chord, we're going to play a C. We just take our ring finger, place on the third fret of the A string, remove our index and middle. And then after we do the C, we go back to a G chord, in which case our ring finger will go up to the third fret of the E string, with the other 2 fingers on, right? So going from G to F to C to G. And then it repeats. So it basically doubles up on the G, right? So let's go ahead and try playing this together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Pretty cool sound, right? And what's fun is we can speed this up and you'll notice the identity changes just a little bit. Some patterns, when they're sped up, sound better or worse, and I think this one just sounds a little different. So here's what it sounds like when it's done nice and fast. So for plenty more patterns just like this, I have to do that plug for the Ultimate Ukulele Strumming Course that I did with Ukulele Underground. We work on a bunch of different patterns that utilize chunking and other techniques just like this, and break them down and actually write out the patterns using that concept of missing the strings that we were talking about earlier. So if you'd like to have some extra practice with more patterns, be sure to check that out if you haven't already. The link is right here below. So be sure to leave a comment below if you have any questions with today's lesson working on this pattern. I really enjoy working on it. I think it's a fun one that can do a lot of, work in a lot of songs. Anytime that you would find your basic Calypso pattern, which is your down, down, up, down, up, you can try this and it most likely will work. But if you have a pattern that you think is the best on a ukulele, please leave it in a comment below. And I will see you guys next week for another episode of Webcam Sessions. Have a great week.